Welcome, everybody, to a special edition of the Sports Guys Iowa podcast. We've got a combination show tonight. We do the Dr. Bowser basketball show. We do the Chad Harberts show weekly. We're doing them three times a week in the basketball season. If you're listening on Apple and Spotify, you're not going to see that we've got three guys in UNI gear on tonight. So we're really going to lead with UNI. If you're watching us on YouTube, you'll see that. I think Bowser's going to join, but we're going to do this jointly. We got Chad on, Chad Harberts. We got Sean Olson, and we got Nick Pace. Everybody knows Chad, his background, and what he does. But I'm going to ask Nick and Sean to introduce themselves. So, Sean, I'm going to start with you. Give your background, your UNI connection, where you live, what happened to you after 1994.
Yeah.
That kind of fun stuff. And if you could introduce yourself, and then we're going to dive into talking about who the Panthers drew, who the Cyclones drew, who Iowa drew, and we're going to talk about the tournament. Sean, if you don't mind starting there, it'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I grew up right near Northern Iowa, Grundy Center, Iowa. And after that 1990 run in the tournament, I had to go be a Panther, and I had to go work for the men's basketball team. So I spent 5 years as a basketball manager. Had the time of my life traveling all over the country and just being a part of the Panther family. Coincidentally, I graduated, and assistant coach at UNI was Kevin Lehman, and Kevin was taking the head job at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. And he asked me, do you want to come be an assistant on my team? And I jumped at that opportunity, and so made the move to Omaha, Nebraska, spent a couple years on Kevin's staff, and then transitioned to the athletic department, spent 8 years at the UNO athletic department, went and opened up the convention center arena downtown in Omaha as my next job, jumped into minor league baseball for 5 or 6 years with the Omaha Storm Chasers, and now I am vice president of client services and sales for a full service event production company. It's been a great run. Love hearing about the Panthers and rooting on the Panthers and being a part of the basketball family.
That's great. Let's jump over to our other guest tonight, Dr. Nick Pace, University of Kentucky, former UNI player. I believe, Sean and Chad, he might be the only guy to have seen the three greatest shots in Panther history in person. So one is a player with Maurice Newby. You were there for the Farouk Damesh shot, right, Nick?
I was not there for the Farouk Damesh shot. I was there for the Jesperson shot.
You were there for the Jesperson shot. So
tell
us about where you went to high school, how you ended up at UNI, and your journey.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, guys. Appreciate the invitation. So I grew up in Winterset, Iowa, came to UNI in 1987, and was there from 87 to 92. Great 5 years, and really fortunate to be coming to Cedar Falls at the time that Coach Miller was, all of the excitement behind that. Graduated in 92, was a teacher and a basketball coach and a principal in Iowa for some years, then back to UNI as a faculty member for 17 years, and then to the University of Nebraska Lincoln for 8, served as a department chair for educational administration at UNL, or UNL as Nebraskans call it, Nebraska as the rest of the world calls it, and then came to the University of Kentucky in July of 25, and I serve as Dean of the UK College of Education here now. So yeah, great experiences all the way through with UNI. I have my bachelor's degree and my doctorate are both from UNI, and my wife has a degree from UNI, so it's a special place in our family.
Yeah. Isn't there a picture of you sort of giving Newby an awkward hug on the court after he hit that shot?
There's a bunch of dudes attempting to give Noob a hug on the court at that point. And I will say that I had a great view of the Newby shot and of the Jesperson shot from where I was seated at both of those shots when they were taken. Clear sight line, guys.
That's awesome. That's awesome. But you're one of the biggest UNI fans that I know and went to school there. And it's great to have you guys on. So, Chad, the Panthers, they got a 12 seed. They drew St. John's. Chad, why don't we start with you? What's your thoughts?
Well, when I talked with Jacobson on Monday at the Monday press conference, he at that time felt like they were pretty much locked into the 12. He said that we could maybe fall to the 13. It's unlikely we get to the 11. And I think back then we were all looking at probably going to Philadelphia or possibly going to Portland on some of those 5-12 matchups. They end up in the East. They end up, you can call San Diego the East, which is sort of strange, but they end up in the East playing St. John's. This looks like another one of those Jake teams that you just don't want to play because of how good they are defensively and how good they are at rebounding. He's built his reputation there for 20 seasons now or so by having that kind of squad. And early in the year, they look like world beaters. I mean, they'll tell you they should have probably started 10-1. They were that close. Then some injuries hit midseason. They had that 5-game slide, and I think some people jumped off the bandwagon. But that team that rolled through the Missouri Valley Conference tournament, that's what they look like in the first 10 or 11 games this season. And now they're, again, one of those teams with the reputation they have, and certainly with the team he's put together, that nobody, including St. John's, wants to face, because they're one of those teams that can slow a game down, can make you only take one shot, and can really just create fits that you're not used to seeing in your regular season games.
Yep. Sean, why don't we go to you next? What do you think of the draw?
You know what? I think it's going to be pretty good. It could be a rock fight between those two. They could be just full on defense for the whole 40 minutes. But I just don't think the Big East was a great conference this year. And if you look at St. John's, they kind of struggled early on, and they lost to UConn by 30 in the regular season. And so I think they're beatable. And I do think UNI has got a shot here. I think if they rebound the basketball and play physical, I think that they can pull that 12-5 upset and move on to the next round.
That's great. Nick?
Yeah, I think you guys captured it. In a lot of ways, UNI and Miami, Ohio, and those teams are like the prototype. Nobody wants to play you, and so you got to go get your bigger name games in a preseason tournament or whatever. And what Chad and Sean said is exactly right. That's why nobody wants to schedule them. And yeah, I think it comes down to rebounds, pace of play. And I remember years ago with some of the really good teams that Jake had, there being kind of a tipping point stat that if they made 10 or more threes, they beat about anybody. And if they made between 7 and 10, it was a tight game. So I think you figure those three things in, and I don't fear playing St. John's at all. Certainly they'll be well prepared, Rick Pitino and all of that. But my sense of the guys is that they're ready to line up and play, and then a challenge.
Yeah, I would say, Chad, we've been on a podcast together, and you like to use the term aircraft carriers. Just looking at St. John's, they're athletic, but they don't have a monster-sized post player, which I think bodes well for UNI, because that's the one area where Hornseth really gives great minutes, but he's maybe 6'9". So I felt like this would be a big matchup. I felt like this would be a matchup they can compete in. I was concerned if they played a really big team, like a Purdue type front line, I think would give them trouble.
The one thing I think about with this game is, and I think about the 90 game against Missouri. Missouri was number 1 in the country 2 weeks before the Northern Iowa game. They lost to Notre Dame on national TV. They lost to Nebraska in the first round of the Big 8 tournament. But at the same time, they were thinking, well, it's UNI. We were number 1 team 2 weeks ago. Now we're playing UNI, who's never made a tournament. Now you think about St. John's out there in New York, a bunch of East Coast players, a bunch of people who've probably never heard of the state of Iowa, let alone the University of Northern Iowa. How is he going to convince those kids this is a dangerous game in San Diego against a team that most of them have probably never heard of, and that always plays to UNI's favor? I remember the story I heard, but I'm sure Nick knows way better than I do, but the story that I heard from Eldon Miller about that 90 game, which is when the first media timeout comes, I want Missouri to wonder how they're going to beat us. We're going to play so good the first 4 minutes, they're going to wonder how they're going to compete with us, not the other way around. And that's what I think St. John's is going to be worried about a little bit, is overlooking a UNI team that does not have as great a record as maybe some of the previous teams that have gone there, but certainly Northern Iowa doesn't resonate in the New York City area where these guys are all kind of grew up and played. They may overlook this UNI team, and you may be able to catch them off guard in the first 4, 8, 12 minutes of that game, like Nick's team did in 90 against Missouri.
Yeah, I think that all makes perfect sense, Chad. And to watch us warm up in 1990, we weren't overwhelming appearance-wise in warm-ups, and size-wise or prowess or whatever. The Panthers this year probably have a little bit of that same appearance thing going for them when you're used to whoever you're lining up against in the Big East. I think that all works in the Panthers' favor. And I remember Coach Miller, as we prepared for Mizzou, talking about how we didn't have to be superhuman. We didn't have to play perfect, flawless, crazy out of our mind basketball. You just got to do what you do. You got to be solid. And obviously for Coach, that was defense and rebounding, smart shots, and go play. And clearly Jake's guys will be well prepared to approach it the same way.
Yeah, I would say just one thing. I don't know if you guys looked ahead, but the NCAA selection committee does have a sense of humor. I know they're not real big on the mid-major teams like UNI, but if they do advance, there seems to be a team from Lawrence, Kansas that they might face in the next round. I do appreciate their sense of humor because, boy, UNI Kansas, if that happened, that would be a really fun round 2 game.
Yeah, I think that's a tremendous matchup, obviously, because of the history that the 2010 team, that was a funny year too, because UNI got a really bad seed that year. UNI was much better than what they got seeded, and having to play UNLV in the first round. And for me, being a grad and knowing the program a little bit, it was so easy to pick UNI over UNLV. Nobody else thought that was outside the people that are all alums and whatnot, but that was an easy pick because everybody knew UNI should have been seated much higher. And then to catch Kansas off guard, and that's funny, I just moved to Vegas 2 months before that tournament started. And I was kind of going to the M Casino back then, and they had a giant sports book, and ESPN had put a camera out there to take some just footage of the whole convergence of people that come to Vegas for the first 4 days of the tournament. They had a camera in this sports book, which is a massive sports book, and every seat is filled. And I'm actually standing along the wall because I'm watching the game in the sports book, and UNI goes off at plus 700 to beat Kansas. So nobody's betting on UNI. I know that, but most people have Kansas winning the entire national championship that year. So when UNI wins that game, if you ever see the ESPN footage of the pan at the end of that game, there's 2 guys yelling. There's me along the wall, and there's one guy in the middle of this sea of people who I'm sure was the only guy in the room who bet on UNI to win. And we're both yelling, and everybody else is just so angry because their bracket is completely wrecked, and they've lost all these bets.
That's a great story.
That is the beauty of it.
Yeah, let's hope that they'll get through. And we're going to come back and talk about how far we think UNI will go. So let's jump into the other teams, right? And let's talk Iowa, Iowa State. And because I got a nephew going to Nebraska, let's talk Nebraska. Why don't you guys just kind of share how far you think each of those teams go? So, Sean, why don't we start with you and just go Iowa State, Iowa, Nebraska, and then close with UNI.
Yeah, Iowa State, I think they're really good. But the one stat I saw is they're not great away from Hilton for that high of a ranked team. They still kind of struggled on the road a little bit. I think that they'll get to the Elite Eight, and I see them losing in the Elite Eight. I think the bracket they're in, Alabama, Virginia, Tennessee, Michigan, I think it's tough. And I just don't see them getting out of there. But they'll make a little bit of noise, but I just don't see them going to the Final Four.
Okay. What about the Hawkeyes, Sean?
Hawkeyes, I think that's a tough draw. I do like the way they play, but again, Iowa really didn't beat anybody in the top 25 this year. They beat Nebraska, but I just don't think Nebraska is that great, in my opinion. So I think it'll be tough, but Bennett Sturts plays like Bennett Sturts. I think they've got a fighting shot.
Okay. So you're thinking first round win, then knockout?
Yeah, I think they potentially could win the first round, but I don't think they're going much farther than that.
Okay. We've got Nebraska and then close with the Panthers.
Yeah, I think Nebraska, I think they better be worried. That Troy team is a really, really good team. And I think they're going to give Nebraska everything they want. And if it's a close game late, Nebraska's got all the pressure. Only Power Five team that has never won an NCAA tournament game. I think that if Troy keeps that close, I think Nebraska is probably going to lose that game. And I've got Troy winning that thing outright.
Okay. All right. What about the Panthers?
Panthers, I've got them beating St. John's. I do think that they will do enough to get St. John's. I think Kansas is going to be interesting in that second round. If Darren Peterson shows up and plays, I think that might be where Northern Iowa ends their season.
Okay. Sounds great. Chad, why don't we move to you next?
Iowa State, I like to draw the first two rounds. I think they're a Sweet 16 team. I think that Virginia team is dangerous. Who do you get later on? Tennessee obviously is dangerous. I concur with what Sean said, as Iowa State has struggled away from home this year. I think they can at least make the Sweet 16. I'm not sure about the Elite Eight, but they should get out of the first weekend for sure. Iowa and Nebraska in the South, I think they both got bad draws all the way out. I mean, even if Iowa and Nebraska win, Iowa's got Florida waiting for them. Nebraska's got Vandy waiting for them. Vandy's playing great basketball right now. Certainly there's a lot of pressure in Nebraska because if you watch the selection show, it must have been said 4 times that Nebraska's never won an NCAA tournament game. So that's going to be talked about endlessly the next few days until that game happens. But I think they can beat Troy. Troy's dangerous, but they can win that game. But of course, you got Vandy in the next round, and that's kind of a toss-up. Iowa, again, if Iowa plays well, like Sean said, yeah, they can beat Clemson. I don't think they get past Florida, but I could also see Iowa not getting out of the first round in that one. As far as UNI, I think for UNI, I think it's go big or go home. I think if UNI wins the first game, they go to the Sweet 16.
Yeah.
But they may not win the first game. I mean, it is St. John's, and St. John's, Pitino finds ways to win games. He's obviously a very good coach. So you're not going to out-coach him. You might coach as well as him, but you're not going to out-coach Pitino. So I think UNI can win that game at St. John's. They can certainly win any game. And then if you're UNI, why would you fear Kansas? Kansas not only has lost to UNI in the tournament, they've lost to other midweight majors in the tournament in the second round. Kansas has certainly shown some games this year where they can implode. And so I think if UNI wins game 1, they win game 2, and you got a Panthers team back in the Sweet 16.
Yeah, I love the sound of that. Dr. Pace, we'll go to you.
Yeah, I'm glad to go third here after the two Swamis have weighed in. I think Iowa State makes it to the Sweet 16. I agree with everything that was said about Nebraska and Troy. I think Nebraska wins. I think Vandy's a big ask. Vanderbilt football and basketball all of a sudden being good. I can't believe we're having the conversation, but that's the new world we live in, right?
Hey, Dr. Pace, let me interrupt one moment. Indiana basketball is terrible, and they won the national title in football.
Yes,
the world is completely upside down.
Did you see the meme on Instagram that was Bob Knight holding the phone and Tom Osborne holding the phone, and the Indiana football record and the Nebraska basketball record below their pictures? And the caption was, "Hey, Bob, Tom here. Listen, you're not going to believe this." But I digress. I think Clemson beats Iowa in the first round, and I agree with Chad. I think if you get St. John's, I think Kansas always, to me, feels like a wild card. They could go deep or they could go home. I like the Panthers in the Sweet 16 if you get the first one against St. John's.
Okay, I think that's great. I'll give you mine. I'll start with Iowa State. I think they're going to get to Elite Eight this year. I think a little bit like what Sean said. I think the pressure on Iowa State as a program to get past the Elite Eight is pretty big. And I think they're going to face a tremendous team to get there. And I just feel like, unfortunately for them, I feel like the end of the road is the Elite Eight. And then when I go to Iowa, Iowa's playing in Tampa. Clemson's not that far. That program has been really good the last few years. They have really good fans. They can travel. Clemson to Tampa's close. I think it's going to be a road game. And I think because of that, Iowa's going to go out in the first round. If they do get by just who they got next, it's a super tall order. They got Florida in Tampa. You talk about Clemson having a home game, that's going to be a real home game for Florida. I think that's just too much of an ask. When it comes to Nebraska, I kind of tend to agree where Sean is. Troy's a tough draw, but I'll use Chad's analogy. Then get by that first game, that psychological hump. I think they actually get through. They get Vandy. Vandy's a really good ball club, but I don't know if you guys have ever been to their facility in Vanderbilt, which I have when I was living in the South. They get a lot of their wins because they're playing in that raised court like Minnesota has with the benches underneath the basket. It's just a really weird thing, guys. And so I think because of that, I think Nebraska's either going to go home right away or get to the Sweet 16. But I'm going to call them getting the Sweet 16 and then they end. And then just because I'm a homer, I'm going to take UNI to get to the Sweet 16. I think it ends there. But I think what Chad said and what you said, Dr. Pace, is really dead on. I think they're either going to go big or go home right away. And I think St. John's, they don't have a lot of aircraft carriers, so I think they got a shot.
JD, I like your reasoning there. And beyond the scouting report and beyond executing on the court, if Nebraska can survive the first game against Troy, I think it's possible to flip the whole monkey on your back curse, never only team in the Power 4 or 5 that hasn't won a tournament game. After that first one, that becomes irrelevant. And then you've got a crew that's on a mission with wind in their sail. And so who knows?
Yeah, it just feels like it's interesting because Iowa State, guys, we've all been watching ball for 25 years. This is one of the best teams ever had. And they looked really good against Arizona. They look like they're one of the top 8 teams, but can they finally break through? I just feel like the psychological barrier is tough. When they get to the Elite 8, something bad happens. Pfizer gets hurt. Somebody gets hurt. They always seem to be cursed in the Elite 8. So, hey, we had Bowser join a little late. I know he's working. For those of you at home, you can't see he's got a St. Louis Blues hockey hat on, which seems wildly inappropriate for a call on college basketball.
Well, here's the deal.
Right, that's Dr. Bowser, though. Wildly inappropriate. Always has
there
been.
you go. Back in Iowa this weekend, working on cleaning out my mom's house. And it feels like when I'm not here, I look at the weather and it's like 50 degrees and sunny here. And today we're under a blizzard warning. And so I have determined that if I ever move back to Iowa, I will become a stocking cap guy all winter long. Because I haven't taken it off. I haven't taken it off since I got here Friday night at about midnight.
So Bows, why don't you join in? And we picked an order. How far we thought Iowa State would go.
Yeah.
How far Iowa would go, then Nebraska, then close with UNI.
All right. So Iowa State, I think, is an Elite 8 team. I think they did get a good draw. They actually are they're a seed line higher than I thought they were going to be. I really projected them out as a 3 seed. And so having the 2 seed being in St. Louis, I think that's going to give their fans an opportunity to travel that first weekend. And so a 2 seed, I think, is great for them. I do see them moving through the first weekend. And then I think they can win one, lose one on the second weekend. I really do think the Hawkeyes can win their first round game, but I think they lose to the number 1 seed in the second round. As far as the Panthers go, first of all, St. John's is maybe a seed line lower than I thought that they were going to be. I really kind of projected them. They were the regular season and postseason conference champion of the Big East. And I think the national media would say that the Big East is maybe down as a whole this year, but still it feels a little low to have the regular season and the postseason champion of the Big East to be on the 5 line. You and I thought, if you listened to us the other night, I think they landed on the 12 line, which is kind of where we thought they would. I will say this. I do believe that UNI can win their first round game. And so I am a homer also. So, of course, I'm going to pick them through the Sweet 16. But I think you're right, John. I think it ends right there. But St. John's is a very talented team. Zuby Ejiofor is their main guy on the inside, and he's really talented. He's really good. However, I really like the way that UNI will. I think they will try to slow pace of play. I think that they will really defend on the perimeter, and I think they will hit shots. And so if they hit shots, they're really tough to defend. Any of our listeners have been listening over the course of the last couple of weeks. One of the things that we think UNI does really well is share the basketball. Even like in the Valley Championship, they were 31 made field goals on 25 assists. And so if they are able to do that in the first round against Louisville, I really am confident that they can pull that classic 12-5 upset.
Yeah, I think that's great counsel, Chris. So, guys, we kind of all picked. We'll probably later, as we get through, kind of come back to each guy on the here and ask who we think will get to the Final Four, right? Put that together in a separate podcast because we're cutting this like 45 minutes after they announce the brackets. Chad may be going to see the Panthers live. Maybe.
We'll find out tomorrow if I'm going to San Diego or not. I know the phone calls are being made as we speak. We're a little tapped out with Jimmy Nelson. Most of you know he's going with the UNI men's wrestling team to Cleveland. And then, of course, the basketball happening at the same time. So they're talking about sending me with the men's basketball team, who I've covered a little bit this year. I usually cover the women's basketball team quite a bit, but I've covered the men a few times of late. And so we'll find out tomorrow.
Good. So you may be going, but if not, you're going to be covering it really close.
Yeah.
And you're going to be talking about it. Hey, Dr. Pace, I know you're now a doctor at the University of Kentucky. We didn't mean to omit him, but you want to give any predictions on Kentucky while you're on?
I see an interesting round 2 game with the Cyclones. I have season tickets at Rupp, and it is a spectacle like really none other that I have seen, and that one could be entertaining. We'll see what the time is for the Panther game and what time the UK game is on, and there will be some monitors in my building with those games on.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I guess I missed the Kentucky Iowa State game. That could be fun for you. I know being a Panther back then, that was back in the Johnny Orr days when you were playing them. If I recall, the Cyclones were pretty good back then. So
they were.
Yep.
They lost in the dome, though.
They did. They did lose in the dome.
Yeah, we got them in junior year in the dome.
Yeah.
Actually, we lost to Morningside at home, and 3 days later beat Iowa State at home.
Wow.
We had a big crowd, and you guys controlled Victor Alexander pretty well all game long and got a big win.
Yeah, how to say it? We regrouped a bit after that Morningside loss.
As we do more of these, we'll start sharing some more Eldon Miller stories. Hey, Dr. Pace, what I wanted to ask was, Bowser wanted you to share a story before we left about Palmyra, Missouri tonight. If you're willing to do it, if you're not, I'll cut it out later.
Yeah.
But if you could share that story, I think our listeners would enjoy that.
It is a fun story. I don't know, probably 8 or 9 years ago now, we were in Cedar Falls. And I had taken our daughter to St. Louis to drop her off for a college trip. She was flying out. So I was on my way back to Cedar Falls in my Prius, which doesn't really matter, except you do have to get gas at times for the Prius. And so I rolled into a truck stop, I believe it was in Palmyra, and zipped in there, filled up, went inside, grab a Pop-Tart or whatever, and I'm paying at the counter. And the dude behind the counter, just straight out of Central Casting, think like Kid Rock working the cashier at the truck stop. And he kind of looks at me and he says, you play any basketball? And I said, yeah, played quite a while ago now. He says, where at? I said, played at Northern Iowa. He says, y'all any good? And, a lot of times I can think of what I should have said about 24 hours later, in a meeting or in some kind of interaction or whatever. But right then, I like to think I met the moment. And I said, well, Larry, good enough to beat Mizzou in the 1990 NCAA tournament. He kind of, all right. I mean, he didn't give me the gas for free or anything. I mean, I paid full price. I paid for the Pop-Tart, the whole thing, but
Yeah.
I could not get to the car soon enough to text the fellas on my thread.
Yeah. Hey,
I
almost interrupted when you were talking, Dr. Pace, because I just want to see, how does a 6'10" guy look in a Prius, for God's sakes?
JD, I'm a walking stereotype, right? I mean, college professor at that time, I kind of have I prefer a bow tie. So you got Professor, Prius, bow tie. I'm checking all the stereotype boxes, just running them down.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, gentlemen, thank you for the great show. Chad, you got any parting thoughts before we go?
I know we're going to do this again very soon.
Yes.
And I want to talk about the 90 team a lot, because I was a UNI fan as a little kid. And this is how bad it is. A month ago, I was refereeing a sub-varsity game up in Cedar Falls, and Steve Craftston was in the crowd. And I fanboyed like I was 13 years old. I'm 56 years old, and I fanboyed like I was 13, because I was talking to Steve Craftston, and I was talking to Tim Moses, who some of you guys might know, the athletics director over at Waterloo East. Yeah, in the crowd before I was refereeing the sub-varsity game. But that 90 team, there's so many great stories and great moments in that whole season, and got it all started for what we're talking about now in Northern Iowa in the tournament in 2026. That 90 team that Nick was on, and I was just a guy who was a sports editor of the school paper and followed him every step of the way. But that, in my lifetime, and that's still just a really special moment of the win over Iowa in front of 23,000 people, and the unbelievable AMQ tournament where Northern Iowa was going to lose a bundle of money because UNI was going to get bounced in the first round, and somehow made it through and won the championship. And then the stories that I know Bowser knows and Sean knows, and Nick probably knows too, the stories I've heard from Chris Rolfus over the years, and stories I've heard from Bob Sunvold over the years from the Southwest Missouri State kind of connection. And I worked with him down at UMKC for a couple of years. So that's still, all these great things that Northern Iowa has done over the years since then are fantastic. But that 1990 team, I guess because that's when I was in college and was there, that's just still my favorite team of all the Northern Iowa teams. And sometime we need to get in depth and tell some stories about that, because there are some great stories out there.
Yeah.
I think maybe one of the best untold stories is a couple of weeks before you guys beat Iowa, you played Georgetown in a tournament in Vegas. And didn't Alonzo Mourning take a swing at Fife?
Bows, he may have taken a swing at Fife, but I have very little memory of that game other than my short corner fader with Zoe closing fast on me. And it went in. And so I choose just to focus right there and keep that memory in the box. And, what happened to Fipes or didn't happen to Fipes, he's on his own.
That's right.
Steve can take care of Steve, but he very well may have. I remember we were down 4 at halftime and lost by 34. Zoe got loose on us in the second half a little bit.
That was a good one. Fife has told me that story multiple times.
That's awesome.
It's probably a good thing for Mutombo and Mourning's sake that we were able to talk Steve down at that point.
That's right.
100%.
Not react in a way that was going to escalate.
Yeah, you don't want Nashua Plainfield Mafia coming after you in the middle of the game.
No, don't poke that tiger. Don't do it.
Look, guys, that was a lot of fun. The combination Bowser Harbert show. Guys, we'll be following up this week. Appreciate you getting on. We'll ask you more in depth. We're going to have a whole bunch of former Panthers and coaches weighing in on what the team does this week. And thanks a lot, man. It was just a blast. Impromptu, kind of putting the two shows together. Chad will have shows this week because he's going to be covering it like crazy. Biles will have shows. And as many former Panthers as we get on this week, let's do it.
That's awesome.
Thanks, John. Glad
Thanks,
to be
guys.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you all.
Keep
Thanks,
up the good
JD.
work.
See you guys.